Oh, so repulsive. Okay, I want to move on to another story. You guys may remember. Please, by the way, please click thumbs up, click share, let people know about this. We're always fighting suppression, and if you don't stick around to the end, I hope you will. Well, whether you do or not, I hope you'll check out the new episode of Unredacted tonight. Just came out last night, and I think you're really going to love it. Also, it has some good news in there. There's a good news segment. If you're looking for a good news segment in the new episode of Unredacted, that's at leecamp.com/unredacted. But okay, this next segment, you might recall, I covered it a while ago. The name Gonzalo Lira. He is a writer, a commentator. I didn't agree with everything he said, but that's not really, shouldn't matter. And it shouldn't matter whether you did or didn't either. And that goes for any writer, commentary, any person who's put in this situation that he was put in. He's arrested by Ukraine for speaking the truth about the proxy war in Ukraine. And he was killed in prison. Because there has not been a real investigation, we don't know, the guest will have more information on this, but we don't know whether he was killed by depriving him of his meds or killed by, literally just murdering him. I think at this point it's tough to know. But our guest has a lot more information on this. He is leading a charge for a petition, which I'll highlight in a moment, let's see, actually, I should put it up, to get the White House, to get the U.S. government to actually investigate the murder of a U.S. citizen in Ukraine, which seems like something they should investigate no matter what. But yeah, this is an important story, and so that's why I absolutely wanted to cover it. My guest is a former U.S. Peace Corps volunteer in that region. He's also the petition organizer and former U.S. Senate candidate in the state of Virginia. Please welcome Aldous Mina. Hey, Al.
Hi, Lee. How are you? Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being on. You know a lot more about this topic than I do, and I wanted to get all of the details from you. I guess let's start with a little bit of your background and how you got connected to this, but then also I think you need to give a little bit of the story of Gonzalo Lira because, even though I covered it, I know that story definitely slipped through the cracks for a lot of people.
Right. So my background was in emerging and frontier markets of Central and Eastern Europe. I first landed in that region as a former U.S. Peace Corps volunteer under the U.S. mission in Bucharest, Romania, embassy mission. And a lot of what I was doing was pretty much in capacity building and economic development, not up until when I found out about Mr. Lira's overall case. That was, after my tour had ended. Back in 2022, he had been arrested at gunpoint, basically, at his apartment and was charged.
And he'd been living in Ukraine for a little while. Like did he have dual citizenship or something? But he'd lived there for a while.
Yeah, he was married at some point with a Ukrainian lady, and they have two infant children that are half American and half Ukrainian, obviously. And so he had been there for several years. But, as what you had mentioned, he was a former journalist and a YouTuber as well. I didn't really follow his content up until I heard about his arrest, basically, back in 2022. He wasn't the most admired person, I guess, in some, circles and communities.
Yeah, I mean, I think his stuff before he was covering Ukraine was more right wing, which is not the stuff that I do. But to me, it doesn't matter. It's like you have someone who's arrested for speaking whatever they're saying, and then murdered in prison. So.
And so it's a pretty, interesting case. It definitely has tons of question marks surrounding it because it doesn't matter what your citizenship is, right? If you're a national of a certain country, your country would want to, kind of want to learn about your overall, issue if you're in distress in a foreign country. It's not, you're not from that country, that's the local language, or you don't operate as a local in that country, then I would imagine your country would want to investigate what's causing your distress. But that didn't happen for Gonzalo. Unfortunately, he got on his YouTube channel and requested assistance from the public, basically, and tried to get somebody to advocate for him, and no one did that in his behalf. I actually was talking about this case on my podcast, Face Economics podcast, and even connected with the embassy in Kiev, U.S. embassy in Kiev, asking for them to intervene. I didn't hear back from anyone. And I've even knocked on the door of the Ukrainian embassy in Washington, D.C. to have a formal meeting with Ambassador of Ukraine to the U.S., and they pretty much just brushed me off. So it's a really strange situation. You would think that, people would want to advocate for Gonzalo, given that he was basically just reporting off of what was being talked about in the local news in Ukraine as well as overseas. So he wasn't creating content per se that he, just came out of, his own. He was piggybacking off of
it was the stuff being reported that Ukraine did not want people learning about.
Exactly. Unfortunately, that may be the case. But for me, I didn't have a horse in this race. I didn't, want to take sides specifically because I know that it's an ongoing issue and there's a lot of public diplomacy involved regarding the situation. But, Gonzalo was simply piggybacking off of the information that was shared in the local news in Ukraine as well as overseas. So it's kind of baffling for someone that was sharing the same information that's already widely known to be silenced the way that he was silenced. And on top of that, when he tried to exit the country, when he tried to leave Ukraine, he wasn't given that opportunity to leave. So that's a violation of his freedom of movement.
So I don't remember every detail, but I remember they arrested him and they then let him out pending his trial. But they said, you're not allowed to leave Ukraine. And he then did a video at the border of Ukraine saying that he's been advised that it's likely because they want him to flee and they aren't allowed officially to allow him to flee. So he believed that they were trying to turn a blind eye. But he did the video because he said, however, when I try and cross this border, if I'm arrested, you might not hear from me. And I need to let people know what's happening. And sure enough, that's what happened. He tried to cross the border. They arrested him. They said, you're trying to leave Ukraine. We told you shouldn't. And then he's killed in prison.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good point. Specifically with, like I mentioned, there's tons of question marks revolving this case. Because, there are, protocols in migration and immigration throughout the world. And so for these kinds of stuff to be happening without U.S. intervention, at that time, during the Biden-Harris administration, without the direct intervention from the U.S. government, was pretty strange, in my opinion. It's not a unique situation. Everywhere in the world, if a foreign citizen is in a country, then there's, immigration protocols that they have to abide by to support the human rights of that citizen of a foreign country. That didn't happen for Gonzalo, unfortunately. And lots of things that it's really very strange took place, and that's why I started a petition to compel the Trump administration to conduct a formal investigation on the death and torture, as what Gonzalo had mentioned in his YouTube video. He's been tortured and extorted, so that we can actually bring some sort of closure for his family and friends and even supporters, because he is a human being, regardless of what you think of him, background-wise or whatever he talks about on his, podcast and YouTube channel. That's irrelevant. He's a human being, and we all should support his right as a human being, as an individual that is in a foreign country. If you're in a foreign country, I don't care what your nationality is. If you're in a foreign country, you still have a right to be, protected in that country, regardless of your citizenship. And he wasn't cool with that.
And the United States generally will work fairly hard to protect their citizens, but because they wanted this proxy war to go ahead and they are siding with Ukraine, they basically didn't care what Ukraine did. I mean, they didn't want Gonzalo Lira reporting from Ukraine either. So it kind of serves a purpose to get him out of the way, which is repulsive. But these are sociopaths running our government back during the Biden administration and now. And anyway, change.org is where the petition is, and I went ahead and put it in the chat as well. But for those of you listening to the podcast, you probably just go to change.org and search for Lira's name, and I'm sure it would come up.
Right. So I think you point out a very, interesting point regarding what you had mentioned of the proxy war and the overall nefarious issues surrounding this, conflict between Russia and Ukraine, because basically Gonzalo was trying to escalate the war conflict. He's trying to save as many lives as possible. His wife's Ukrainian, both of his children half Ukrainian. So he didn't have any reason to take sides. He wants to preserve peace and bring both parties into a diplomatic, amicable solution between the two countries. But that didn't take place because of what you had mentioned. The Biden-Harris administration obviously had an alternative motive, and they wanted to, I guess, escalate the situation at one point or the other. Don't know what the overall, reason for that is. But here we are, thousands of lives lost, and hundreds of billions of dollars worth of U.S. taxpayers basically contributed to a war that could have been prevented. When I was running for U.S. Senate back in 2020, I actually tried to talk about these kinds of possible escalation when I was stumping and trying to connect with the national news organizations like CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News. And none of them would want to cover my hypothesis, basically, that a war conflict could escalate between Ukraine and war after the pandemic. And so here we are, 3 years later, and there's still an ongoing war between Ukraine and Russia that could have been prevented had they listened to organizations and commenters like you yourself. I commend you tremendously for your, you have the backbone and the resolve to be a problem solver in the world. Unfortunately, people like you, people like us have been silenced and we've been, basically bamboozled of our voice. They tried to take our voice because they know what we represent is much bigger than who we are. And I commend you, and I commend your audience for following you, because you're trying to expose things that could have saved so many people, and so, anguish around the world. I appreciate you.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for your efforts as well. I know you're a little in touch with the Lira family. Have they ever gotten a response from either government, Biden, Trump, anyone, as to whether they're going to look into it or what they think happened or anything?
Yeah, unfortunately, they've been very silent specifically on this issue. It's still a diplomatic case, obviously, and I know that Gonzalo's father had signed our petition, and he's aware of our petition. I tried connecting with him to have him actually come on your show and do this interview, but I think there's just so much moving pieces to this whole case right now that I guess they're trying to just deal with their grief at this point, and leave the advocacy with their supporters and with guys like you. I'm pretty sure they appreciate you for wanting to continue on to basically seek justice for their son and father and husband. And I think that's what this whole petition stands for. We're basically just wanting to bring closure closure and peace to a family that never got to say goodbye to their loved one. Imagine your son or father, friend, return to you in an urn, in an ash. You never know what happened to that person, your relative, family member. You imagine the kind of suffering that you must have to deal with when you see your son on YouTube, you see your husband and your father on a social media platform trying to save their lives. Imagine that kind of suffering that a family member would have to deal with, seeing your loved one asking for help from the world, basically, and never got it. And then all of a sudden, a couple of weeks later, you get the ash of your loved one sent to you. You have no idea what happened to their body.
And for journalism, for the crime of journalism.
Exactly. And that's why, I want to give kudos to you because you have, the backbone to share information that the national news media around the world doesn't want to ignore the world with.
Well, thank you. I certainly have not been anywhere near the front lines like Lira was. So obviously, what he was doing was quite brave in many ways. So hopefully people will go and sign this petition. Is there anything else you want to tell people about this effort?
Yes, I'd like for everyone to just reflect on what we're trying to accomplish. This isn't even political. This is just, us being decent human beings. Being someone that actually, would at least reflect on the story as a human being. Just, share our petition, share our story with your friends and family. Reflect on it. If you don't feel like signing, don't sign it. But just reflect on what happened to Gonzalo, okay? I mean, he tried to de-escalate a conflict that could have saved millions of lives, okay? That's what he tried to do with his life, basically. He gave his life for that cause. And if you're a decent person, if you're a decent human being, I would at least try to, honor that kind of, commitment if I were, So please share our petition, reflect on it. If you have a message for the family, the Lira family, send your thoughts and prayers to them. Just be a decent person, be a human being that is worth, being able to walk this planet as a human being, make this world a better place. And so unfortunately, there's only very few people that are willing to make this world a better place. And Gonzalo tried to do that. And, and we appreciate you also, trying to help us connect the dots. I've been silenced many times, even in my campaign, I've been silenced many times. So I know what it's like. And are you gonna campaign again? Are you gonna run again? You know what? The local news in my city didn't even want to talk to me because of what I was trying to share with them, like this case of Gonzalo Lira. I don't know. I may not be the most popular candidate, but I will continue to support decency. I will continue to support, democracy.
They don't really want to. The media doesn't want to talk to anyone that doesn't have loads of money. They don't. They figure that means you're not a serious candidate because you don't have millions of dollars.
Well, yeah, I did go against someone that had several millions in their campaign war chest. But you know what? I don't really care for individuals that have millions. I care about people that are trying to make this world a better place, like you, Lee. I know you've been censored many times. I know your story, and you never gave up. And tried to support, people that have been, basically outcasts, singled out, and you keep on keeping on behalf of what you believe in and supporting causes like what we're doing. That says a lot about who you are as a human being. And I think eventually you're going to be bigger than anyone else that are now racking up millions of dollars I really do love that, man. I really do. I really do because you have the guts, you got the balls, to make a difference. There's not a whole lot of people that is willing to do that.
Well, thank you, man. That's very kind of you, and thank you for your efforts to get some justice and some information on what happened to Gonzalo. So thank you for your efforts, everybody. That's at change.org. I put the link in the comments, but you can also go to change.org and do a search for Gonzalo Lira. Thanks again, Al. I appreciate it. Keep in touch.
All right, Liam. Have a good one. Keep in touch. You take care. Bye-bye.
All right. I appreciate that. It's quite an effort, and it is so insane that the U.S. would just let a American journalist, whether they agree with what he's saying or not, be murdered in a country that they're supporting and sending arms to, and they won't even bother to ask what happened. I mean, I guess it shouldn't be that surprising, considering this is the same country that essentially tried to murder Julian Assange by torturing him in prison for 10 to 12 years, and I think they were hoping that he would just die in prison, and then they kind of ended up with their hand forced to ultimately free him. But I think they very much were hoping that Julian Assange would die in prison. So that's definitely one of the wins from last year. There's not a lot of times as an activist, as those fighting for truth and justice, that you get to say, like, we fucking won that one. But that was definitely one last year because, there was about a 99% chance that Assange was not going to get out. And the only reason that was not 100% was because of the efforts by you guys and so many others to keep that story in the news and to keep it as something that the administration could not just ignore and could not pretend that they didn't know what was going on. So anyway. All right. I'm going to wrap up here in a minute, but I did want to show a little bit of the latest episode of Unredacted tonight. It just came out last night. I'm going to play a few minutes, and I'll come back after I play the few minutes. But yeah, new episode every Thursday. We're also now at Means TV.